Salamat lang. Mayong buntag na tong tanan. So it's exciting to know this fresh technology from Spain. Pero before going there, ako sad ipaila-ila ang atong mga participants. This is a regional summit for the launching of this biochar technology. So first, we would like to acknowledge, first and foremost, our consultant from Spain, Mr. Soderberg. Of course, our our local chief executive, 3 words to forever, Honorable Richard I. Gomez, the city mayor. And the 14th member of the Sangguniang Panglungsod, we have with us the Chairman Committee on Agriculture, Fisheries and Agrarian Reforms, Honorable Tomas R. Serafica. Our very own Chair on Social Welfare and Senior Citizen, Honorable Vince Rama. The Chair Committee on Environment, Honorable Guito Erestorza. The Chair on Laws and Governance, Honorable Bennett Pongos. Okay, so the babysitter, Miss Chrissy Hontanosas. Babysitter daw siya sa atong consultant. Okay, we would like to acknowledge the national government agencies who are here this morning. Representative from the Department of Agriculture, we have one lone representative, Mr. Engineer Palma. 20 students of the Visayas State University, please stand. Under lone teacher. We have from LGU Albuera, lone representative. And LGU Matagob, tulo ni sila. Okay. We have from LGU Palumpon. Okay, welcome. We have from LGU Tacloban. Napayduha nga mo abot daw. We have from local EBR. No? Asa tong taga EBR, okay? We have also Chilianti Marketing Corporation from Ormoc City. We have from Maasin City, or the OPA of Maasin, Southern Leyte. Okay, so wala na ba'y na ligatan? We have also from our Farmers Association, SOFAOC. Isa lang. Is JSB FEMCO. Okay. Lakas na. Sikagpa. MOFA. Okay, from the City Agriculture Office. And we have the fabricator, Mr. Dong Paris and his son. So kung gusto mo order na to lang niya. Okay, so I think that's all. So welcome to Ormoc City, the city of beautiful people. Kaiwa na sila. So thank you and God bless us.
Thank you, Ma'am Yan. So for your welcome address and opening remarks, let us all welcome Honorable Richard I. Gomez, City Mayor.
Daghang salamat. May buntag. Salamat sa inyo pagani karong buntaga, no? Salamat ko kauban nato atong mga kugihan, mga gwapo nga makonsyal nato diri sa syudad, no? Si Dr. Guito Rastorza, si Attorney Bennett Pongos, si Councilor Vince Rama and Councilor Tammy Serafica. Salamat sa atong Agriculture Office for setting this up, o sa atong congresswoman, no, who initiated this program for today. How we came about knowing Mr. Christopher Soderberg, we went to Mallorca, no? We were invited kami ni Congresswoman to talk on small island countries. So daghang mga nasod na dito sa conference, no? Kauban na mo si Attorney Bennett Pongos ug si Vince Rama dito mi nagsuroy. So they talked about climate change, tourism, modern agriculture. And then one evening na may function, medyo bugnaw ba. So sa mga nasod na medyo bugnaw, asala yung mga gamay ng mga magpayong na heater. Dito may nakabarog lang sa kilid, bugnaw ba? So, na tao na nakatindog. Amo nakita si Krister. So, doon mi sa iya. Yeah. Nalanghit mi, can we stay beside you? Can we join you sa table? So, that's how we came about knowing Krister. Nag-storya mi, and then he talked about the things that he's been doing, and he talked about biochar. And then that's where it caught our interest kay ang Ormoc is an agricultural city, no? So sige na siya mo story about biochar. Biochar sunod din. Gawas din post biochar. Kanya the following day or few days gisuri mi sa mga line-line na lugar in Mallorca. And we saw kanang mga farms and how biochar affected ang ilang mga farms. Nindot ang ilang mga production. Nindot ang effect ng biochar sa soil, no? So there's so much interest on this program. That's why si Congresswoman Lucy ask ang iyang consultant sa opisina na si Chrissy to talk to Krister if he can come to Ormoc and talk about here and propagate kinin technology. Biochar is not a new technology. According to Krister, it's been used for thousands of years ago. Except that naabtanta sa paggamit sa modern technology, mga fertilizer. No? And then, karon we are realizing ang effect ng fertilizer. That is why it's important for us to understand how biochar can rejuvenate ang atong mga yuta, how it can help sa atong agricultural production, how it can help us as human beings, no? Bringing back old technology into modern agriculture. So this is what we will be talking about. And I'm very happy na receptive ang atong agriculture office sa technology na to. So mga kagsunan, ako lang ipaila-ila ninyo ang atong speaker karong buntaga. Ang atong seminar taas-taas ni ha. So antos lang mo. What is important here is what we are going to learn and what we are going to adapt in the future. Kinahanglan magtinabangay kita. Okay, this will be very good for us if we will be able to use this. Labi na sa mga estudyante, no? In your studies, this will be very helpful aron ma-propagate ninyo in other places, not just Ormoc City. So, dili na lang ko tas-on kay para inyo na makilala ang atong ang guest karong adlaw. So our gracious resource speaker today hails from the island of Mallorca in Spain. We are very fortunate to have known him when we were there, when we visited Mallorca. Si Bennett Pongo, si Vince Rama, si Chrissy was there, and si Congresswoman Lucy, no? He is presently the Chief Executive Officer of Circle Carbon, an integrated enterprise focused on the production, application, proliferation, and research on biochar. Circle Carbon, also based in Mallorca, is a perfect example of a social enterprise, a business organization that focuses not only on profitability, but more importantly, on environmental protection, climate change, action, and social equality. Being a social entrepreneur is one of the most noble and inspirational paths to pursue nowadays. Frankly, in these challenging times, our world needs more of people like him. Yeah. He was someone who didn't need to do more. After all, he had a lucrative career and a very comfortable expat lifestyle while working in Brazil. However, in the course of growing the business of protective welding equipment in Brazil, he came to realize the environmental and social repercussions of the industry that he was serving. While most successful people choose to close their eyes to such realities, our guest today decided to confront the truths he discovered and take action. His personal change, which started with his conscience, gave way to changing his lifestyle, career, and mission in life. Today, he's an evangelist on biochar and social change, which he will talk about in length today. Kasi sabi ko, medyo taas-taas na yung mga kaigsoon, ano? He's originally from Sweden, but he has lived in and worked in 6 countries and 4 continents. He speaks English, Swedish, Portuguese, Spanish, Catalan, German, French, and Italian. Hopefully one day he'll learn Bisaya. He has studied business at the University of Texas in San Antonio and economics at Stockholm University. He's an avid lifelong learner, charismatic connector of people, and at the same time, a very dear friend. Mga kaigsunan, pakpakan na to, Mr. Christopher Soderberg.
Mayor, I hate to interrupt you, but aside from what the mayor was saying, Krister also has another life in show business. He goes by, I'll just show you. That's Krister in the Hollywood scene. See? So he has 2 lives, huh? So that's the Hollywood life and where he is now. Sir, good morning. It's all yours.
I've been caught out. I've been discovered. Oh my God. Well, I mean, that is the kindest, most generous introduction I've ever had in my life. So I have to sort of restart everything, because this is really a great honor to be here. I want to thank so many people. Mayor Richard Gomez and Congresswoman Lucy Torres Gomez, of course, who I had the great pleasure of getting to know in Mallorca, together with Vince and Bennett in Mallorca, and of course Chrissy. But I've also had the pleasure of getting to know so many wonderful people here in Ormoc, and there are so many, so I need some help from this. And Councillor Tommy Serafika, when Chrissy told me his name, first I said, I understood Sir Africa. I thought, he's a noble man. Very nice to Sir Africa. City Agriculturist Miss Yeyen Mendoza, who's been so kind and generous with her time, and all of her team, Belen, Sarah, Dante, Joel, Ram, and Loloy, who I hope is here also, and Danilo. The staff here at the City Mayor's office, especially Lyra de la Serna and Wilson, for helping us with the technology and the IT. And again, the people of Ormoc. I am humbled by this city that is not only the most beautiful people, but also, for me, the most friendly, truly. So thank you for that. Yes.
Lucy, will you join you with the
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Bye guys. Congratulations, huh?
We've gone through the presentation with the mayor and Vincent and Bennett before. Okay. So I've prepared some slides, and once again, thank you for coming to this presentation. It's really a thrill for me to be able to talk about biochar here in this region, especially since you have such spectacular possibilities, such opportunities to take advantage of all the natural properties of your agriculture. This tropical climate, of course, makes it possible to do so many things that we can't do in Spain, where we have a much more dry and limited rainfall. So I'm going to show you some photos and talk a little bit about the facts that I have learned during these past years. But I would like to begin with this photo that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a photo taken of the Earth on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1968, basically exactly 50 years ago. And this photo taken from the Apollo 13 capsule was a almost it was not planned to have this photo. They just turned around with the camera in the capsule and they took this photograph that has become so famous. And it's said that the environmental movement began with this photo, because it was the first time we were able to see ourselves from space. When we actually turned the camera towards us, instead of looking outward, we started looking inward. And this was a process which continues today, and I think it's something that we can also take to heart, that we should start to look for solutions more on the inside than on the outside. And biochar can teach us some of this process, I believe. At the same time, it's important, I believe, to acknowledge that our society and our economy and our basic system today has taken us to a place that's similar where this man is standing on the edge of a waterfall. So we're really in a time and situation from a climate perspective, from an energy perspective, from an economy perspective, on many different levels, at a time where we really have to rethink what are we doing and how are we doing it, and how do we want our future to look. So a little bit what I'm going to talk about are these 12 points, which I hope to get around. I won't be doing it so orderly as is on this list, but I want to hopefully touch on the different areas. First of all, what is biochar? Then why we should be doing biochar, how it affects our climate security, water security, food security, energy security, and how this fits in with Terra Preta agriculture. Terra Preta is the Portuguese name meaning black soil, which is this technology that Mayor Richard mentioned. It's been going on for 8,000 years. And we can rewrite our history books based on what archaeologists and scientists are discovering in the Amazon of Brazil. We're also going to talk a little bit about how biochar affects slash and burn versus the possibility of implementing regenerative agriculture, which is very important, especially in tropical areas like here in the Philippines or in Brazil. Combined heat and power cogeneration, how biochar can be used for that. Climate breakdown mitigation. I'm an environmentalist, and the whole idea of climate change is perhaps a little misleading. So more and more people are talking about climate breakdown rather than climate change. Change is a natural thing. Change is happening all the time. But to really embrace the urgency and the importance of what we have to do, we have to acknowledge that we're in a situation of climate breakdown. And we have to stop that trend. We're also going to talk about cost savings and productivity increases in agriculture, helped by the application of biochar. And then, of course, making biochar. What are the kilns, the ovens, and the so-called retorts available? What different scales are there to produce biochar? And then, of course, I want to talk about the business of the biochar business, how that works, how I see that personally. And if we'll get around to it, the connection of soil, ancient wisdom, and identity, which I think is also an important aspect of all of these things. We tend to separate, who we are, what we do, but I think it's something that we need to look at all together, especially the ancient wisdom, learning from what people have known throughout the ages, and not making the same mistake again. And of course, all of this is really about the mono versus the multiculture. So what are the differences, how it affects things. And finally, also a formula, a basic formula to how to mix biochar with other ingredients to create this Terra Preta. So, and of course, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. We'll have more questions towards the end, but if there's anything that comes up that you would like to ask, just raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer if I can. So the first question, what is biochar? And that's interesting, because if you look at this photo, this is sugarcane. And it's the structure that's interesting under a microscope. And as you see, there's all these cavities, all these pores, and the structure, the molecular structure of biochar, any char really, when it's burned at a certain temperature, between 400 and 800 degrees, opens up these cavities where the volatile gases have been, and maintains the integral structure of the carbon. And so in these cavities is what's so interesting in the function of biochar. And one can say that 1 gram of biochar has between 100 and 500 square meters of surface area. And of course that's an amazing opportunity for many things to be stored and to get comfortable in, like microorganisms, like nutrients, like water, and so on. So this is the key property of biochar, is that it provides a home for the microorganisms and absorbs water and nutrients so that they can be released at a slower rate. And this prevents leaching and other problems with modern agriculture. Essentially what biochar is, it's a high quality organic charcoal. And by high quality organic, I mean burned between 400 and 800 degrees. There's a big difference, and this is very important, that we don't mistake normal charcoal like what we use on a barbecue with biochar, because normal charcoal usually is burned at a lower temperature, and this makes certain volatiles remain in the charcoal. And these volatiles are basically gases, and they are of course poisonous for microorganisms. So they can have the opposite effect if it's not properly burned, to create these cavities and to eliminate all the volatiles, methane, nitrous oxide, and of course CO2 and so on. So that's an important point. We're not talking about going to the supermarket, buying charcoal and putting it into our garden. In addition to that, many charcoals that are produced for barbecues sometimes have additives that are petrochemical additives to make it burn more. So that would be a further danger of using regular charcoal. So it's important that it's properly burned. But biochar has 2 main criteria. And one is that it's made from biomass residue, which is like cuttings and biomass residue from agriculture, meaning that we don't grow forests to burn them. That's not biochar. So this is part of the solution of biochar, but it's also part of the challenge of biochar, because it means that we cannot develop an enormous plant or industry in any one place to make biochar, because that would defeat its purpose. Biochar only works locally and on many different local small areas. So it's a different type of business that we'll talk about later also. The second is that this biochar is only for soil enrichment purposes. We don't make biochar to burn it on our barbecue, because we want that biochar to fulfill its possibilities of enriching the soil by creating the homes for these microorganisms and being able to absorb that water and those nutrients that can then act as an exchange between the soil and the plant by giving it more nutrients and more growth and more quality. Basically, this diagram shows a little bit how biochar works. We thank nature, sunshine, and the ability of plants to absorb CO2 to grow biomass. We take this biomass, these cuttings, not the tree itself, and we pyrolyze them, the process of burning with slow or small amounts of oxygen. And then we put this biochar into the soil to increase growth and the quality of our foods. Here's just a list of things that I think of when talking about biochar, the realities of the farmer. What is the reality today? Well, we have our situation of climate breakdown, which is a big insecurity about what is happening. We don't know about extreme weather conditions, floods, lightning, droughts, and so on. We have a local and global economy which is in crisis. I mean, our global economy has basically been in crisis since 2008. It goes up and down, but it's under extreme strain. We have an increase in fuel costs. We'll talk more about that later. We have an increase in fertilizer costs, which is related to the fuel, because much of our chemical fertilizers come from the petrochemical industry, so it's oil-based. We have increases in labor costs, and at the same time, there's an increase in demand for quality products. High quality, good looking, and high productivity. At the same time, finally, there's a lower price in many times paid for these products. So the farmer is faced on the one hand with increased costs all around, an unsure global and local economical situation, and pressure on keeping the prices down. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with those different challenges? And I believe that biochar can help a lot with that. Globally, you all have heard of the Paris Agreement at the COP21, the Conference of Parties by the UN in 2015. The COP21 in Paris and the Paris Agreement helped us finally draw a line in the sand and say to private and public institutions that this is the situation as determined by thousands of scientists. This is the situation with our climate, and now nobody can say we didn't know. Participating at the COP23 in Bonn, which was last year, in October of last year, and there, 2 years after Paris, it was discovered or established that we are still in business as usual, and we have to start doing business unusual. We have to change what we're doing. We are en route today on a global average temperature rise of 4 degrees Celsius, and we are only delivering 30% of necessary NDCs. Those are the nationally determined contributions, voluntary, of countries to mitigate climate change. So we've only delivered on 30% of those necessary to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. And in addition, between 2015 and 2017, there's been a 1.7% increase of greenhouse gas emissions. So we're not doing very well. But the difference is now we know it. Before, it's been argued, it's been debated, there's been a lot of uncertainty, but now we know where we stand and we know what we have to do. I'm going to take some back. What's also very comforting for people in the environmental activism is that now reports are coming out confirming the role of biochar, the potential and the opportunities of biochar. This came out just in December, 2 months ago, by the Royal Society in the UK and the Royal Academy of Engineering. I'm just going to read this shortly. Biochar is produced by thermal decomposition of biomass in the absence of oxygen, known as pyrolysis, into a stable, long-lived product like charcoal. Biochar stores original biomass carbon in a form that is relatively resistant to decomposition and that can stabilize organic matter or add it to soil. In this manner, carbon can be stored in the soil for an extended period while also providing a range of soil fertility and soil quality co-benefits. Examples include improved water and nutrient retention and higher crop yields, though this effect may be limited to the tropics. Biochar is an established greenhouse gas removal method, GGR, but it is not yet widely applied, in part due to costs and the limited availability of pyrolysis facilities. However, readiness for implementation at large scale is anticipated within a decade. So, basically, the Kontiki that the City Agricultural Office has already had made by Sir Don Paris. You are pioneers. You are early adopters. You're way ahead. But the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering is already acknowledging the role that biochar will play in the very near future. Here's another report that came out in October, just a month ago, with current technology and using all available land and waste biomass, 4 nets, that's negative emission technologies, so drawdown, afforestation, reforestation, changes in forest management, uptake and storage by agricultural soils, what we're talking about today, and biomass energy with carbon capture and storage, which is also a form of biochar use, could be scaled up to capture and store substantial amounts of carbon. Between 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide per year in the United States and 10 gigatons carbon dioxide per year globally. However, attaining these levels would require unprecedented rates of adoption of agricultural soil conservation practices, forestry management practices, and waste biomass capture. And that's where biochar comes in again. And this is a report by the National Academies of Sciences in the United States. Surprisingly, these reports have not received really any attention in the press. So, you know, we're left to wonder, why is this information not being spoken about more widely? But that's your job, to take this information and use it and show what possibilities are available. I'm going to just, you know, give you a little bit of the background on the climate and emissions, just to set the scene of why it's so important, in case you are wondering why it's so important to do this work with biochar. But if you see on this graph, it talks about the between 30 and 40 gigatons of CO2 that is released into the atmosphere yearly at present. That's what our society is releasing into the atmosphere. And as you know, we're already at 409 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, when scientists years ago established that 350 parts per million was a safe limit. So we're way past, we're 67% past the safe limit of CO2 in the atmosphere. We're not going where we're supposed to be going, and we're still doing business as usual. So we really have to do business unusual. We have to change things. We have to transform things. And we can start by transforming agriculture, which has a tremendous impact, potential impact. But we're at this level of 30 to 40 gigatons per year, and you can see by this graph that in order to keep close to the Paris Agreement goals, we will have to reduce our emissions of human carbon quite drastically, beginning in 2020. So much that we can come down to a safe level below 10 gigatons per year by the year 2050. That's 30 years away. That's really no time at all. It's a blink in the history or planetary development. And here we see the human carbon sinks, which are land use and land use change, and then the engineering CO2 sinks, which is the bioenergy and carbon capture and storage that needs to compensate for the emissions that we've been having. And that basically translates into halving emissions every decade. Now, just to give a comparison, in the financial crisis of 2008, the emissions went down 8%. That was the global crisis of 2008, 8% reduction in global emissions. We need to reduce them by 50% every 10 years. So that gives you an idea of what needs to happen in these next coming decades. And we can do it. You know, we can definitely do. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, but we also need to have the willpower to act, because theory is no longer enough. The good news is that we're already on the right trajectory. So if we take the development of renewables, that's solar, wind, water, and alternative agricultural practices, then we can predict an exponential rise in the use of renewables, which is already happening. So we can see that we can achieve a tremendous amount of renewables in our share of primary energies within 5 to 6 years. And that's the curve that we need to be in. We need to be in at maximum 10 years so that we get to this zero emissions market share. But remember, when we talk about power, we talk about electricity on the one hand, and we talk about other energy like transportation, which is the biggest challenge. 70% of our emissions is related to the transportation, which is mostly fossil fuels. But electric vehicles are also coming online. I like to use this slide because it was sort of a watermark when Fatih Birol, the director of the International Energy Agency, came out with the World Energy Outlook in 2010. And what's interesting here is the black line in the middle, where he basically said global oil production reaches 96 million barrels per day in 2035 on the back of rising output of natural gas liquids and unconventional oil. That's the purple and orange fields. As crude oil production plateaus, it means it goes into a straight line. And we see that straight line. But if you look at what is underneath the straight line, first of all, it's the crude oil currently producing fields, but that curve goes down steeply, starting in 2010, and it's compensated by the light blue field, which is crude oil fields yet to be developed or found. It means in 2010, they knew that oil was over, it was finished. And yet they invented this field to maintain the illusion of a plateau, saying, well, these will be developed or we'll find them. But now 8 years have gone by and they haven't found them. What they have found, they've found fracking and they've found tar sands. And tar sands, you need 5 barrels of oil to make 1 barrel. So it costs you 5 barrels of energy to have 1 ready for the market. And of course that doesn't really add up. And fracking, as we know, is also a tremendous risk to our environment because it affects our water resources, the aquifers, and well, that's another issue. So this desperate effort at keeping our oil supplies, what does it do? And you all know about the conflict in the Middle East, in Syria, and we hear things, you know, about the ISIS, and we hear things about the different groups, and President Assad, and you know, all of these things. But what rarely comes up into the press also is that there is a oil pipeline, natural gas pipeline. One is backed by Russia, the Iran, Iraq, Syria pipeline, which is the red line going up from Iran to supply Europe with natural gas. And one is going from Qatar up through Syria to Europe, which is the US-backed pipeline, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline. Both of them go through Syria. So the future supply of natural gas to Europe depends on who controls Syria, which puts the conflict in the Middle East in a slightly different light. So, you know, do we want to depend on these sources for fuel? Or do we want to create alternatives so that we don't need to have these conflicts in the world? Because these are resource wars. Also at the Paris COP21, the Carbon Brief came out with this graph saying, you know, how much time do we have to reduce our emissions? And I'm only going to look at the bottom, the blue, in order to stay at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. We're already at 1.1 degree, okay? So we're today at 1.1. To stay under 1.5, we basically, to have a better than 50% chance of staying below 1.5, we have 6 years. And that was 2 years ago. So we have 3 years. So what is this Terra Preta agriculture? And I'm now introducing this word Terra Preta because biochar is, as I said earlier, just one ingredient of this soil which is so incredibly fertile, and at the same time is drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere. To talk about Terra Preta, we have to go back to 1542, when Francisco de Orellana and his crew sailed down the Amazon from Peru. He was at first together with Pizarro, the conquistador, and then left Pizarro to sail down looking for food because they were starving. And sailing down the Amazon, they started discovering these settlements. And one of the things that Padre Carvajal wrote on this expedition, he said, there was a city that stretched for 15 kilometers without any space from house to house, which was a wonderful thing to see. And the many roads here that went into the interior of the highlands, fine roads in the interior of the river, a distance of 6 kilometers or so, you could see some very large cities that shone white. And next to this, the land is so fertile and so normal in appearance like ours in Spain. Well, 50 years later, more conquistadors sailed down the same river and they saw nothing of this. They didn't see any proof that there existed any settlements. So they wrote off this account saying that this was a dream, this was, maybe they were eating mushrooms or drinking drugs, and they must have imagined it because it couldn't be possible. Well, 500 years later, we are starting to discover what remains of these settlements after deforestation. And there's more than 1,000 of these settlements that have been discovered already. And around these settlements, they've discovered this thick, fertile soil, this Terra Preta. And so we have to rewrite our history books to say that this was not a continent peopled by savages or small communities that didn't have any culture. These were highly advanced civilizations. And they estimate that alone in the Amazon basin, there were more than 20 million inhabitants. 99% died from diseases introduced by the European conquistadors. And what they found there is this Terra Preta, this black soil. And this is a picture that you find almost first of all when you look for biochar on the internet. And of course you see above the difference between growing corn on a regular soil of the Amazon and when you grow it on Terra Preta. And here you see two pictures of different biochar, the molecular structure, and below you see what it looks like when the microorganisms make their homes inside the biochar cavities, this structure. And here's more different types of chars, because not all biochar is the same. And that's why it's so important that we also are careful with what we promise is possible. And that's why it's so important that we learn by doing, and that we see and we try and we test and we add and we, just like a good cook, we find the right ingredients, the local ingredients, the best tasting ingredients, and we feed it to the soil. We enrich the soil so that the food that the soil gives back to us is the most delicious, the most nutritious, and the most beautiful. Because the soil wants to give these things to us. But we also have to give something back to the soil. I mean, it's just like, when you go to your grandmother for a good meal on Sunday. Grandmother cooks the most amazing food, but you bring her flowers, right? And if if grandmother then enjoys the flowers, when the flowers are withering, what does she do with them? Yeah, well, she puts them in her compost pile, right? That's what you do with flowers or anything organic. You put it in the compost, and then the compost decomposes, and then she puts it back into her garden. And that's how she makes this delicious food, because she's composting, and if there's a fireplace, then there's charcoal coming out of the fireplace, and that goes in the garden too. And that's what they did for 8,000 years in the Amazon. And that's why they have this Terra Preta. Now, we don't need to wait 8,000 years to make Terra Preta. But it's not something that will happen overnight. And that's why it's so important that we start now. Learning, rediscovering, making recipes, formulas that fit local soils, that use the local microorganisms. One of the most impressive things that I discovered at the city agriculture office is that that Yeyen and Sarah and Belen are already making these wonderful microorganism juices. We know them as EM, effective microorganisms. Here you're already working with indigenous microorganisms, IMOs, which is really spectacular. I mean, it really is spectacular what's being done already here. And that's exactly what biochar wants, those indigenous microorganisms. Here's a long list of advantages, benefits from biochar-based regenerative agriculture. It retains nutrients so that it increases the cation exchange capacity, the ability of the plants to absorb nutrients from the soil, CEC. Retains water, which is the availability of the water to plant, high absorption rates, and slow release, which is important in our climate in Spain, because we have sometimes drought. So we can, by increasing the carbon content in the soil, the water that comes when there is rain is released slowly. Provides a beneficial habitat for microorganisms, that's effective microorganisms, or here indigenous microorganisms, or what they call the microorganisms in the South America, which is microorganismos del monte, because it came from the mountain. They went into the forest, they took the soil that was full of microorganisms and mycorrhiza, and they mixed it with their compost. So they gave the microorganisms the ability to multiply. It alters the soil structure, makes it, aerates it, reduces compaction, lowers soil acidity because, well, biochar is inert, but by adding it, you aerate it, you reduce leaching and all of these things. So it alters the soil acidity. If you're using fertilizer, it'll be more efficient because it has this space to go into the cavities, and it also increases the efficiency of irrigation because of its absorption of water. Increased productive soil metabolisms, again the microorganisms or the mycorrhiza. Improved drainage, aeration, lower compaction, therefore increased crop yields, and reduced fertilizer costs by 10 to 20%, and in some cases eventually 100%. Because let's remember, fertilizer is something that you need when your soils are poor or degraded. But soils is an organism. The soil is alive. And if you help it stay alive and thrive, then you don't need fertilizer. What do you need fertilizer for? The soil becomes the fertilizer. You can take that fertilizer soil and give it to your neighbor so that those microorganisms can find homes there as well. And reduced irrigation costs. All of this translates to growing cool products. Cool in the sense that we're reducing the greenhouse gases, climate breakdown, and we're creating a carbon negative footprint. It's not anymore a carbon footprint, not even a carbon neutral footprint, it's a carbon negative footprint. And that, I believe, is also something that will grow in importance as a marketing tool for products grown as a carbon negative product, so as a carbon sink. Because, you know, we all have this label of organic agriculture. That's of course very good, but you know, maybe we can start selling products that have a carbon negative. So when you buy this product, you're actually helping reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. Here are some examples of what happens when you apply biochar to soils. 3 months ago, these banana trees were planted at the same time, the one on the left without biochar, the one on the right with biochar. 2 months ago, these papaya trees were the same height, and 2 months ago, Matelo applied biochar to one tree, the one on the left. The one on the right. So he applied the biochar on the one on the right, and you see that difference. And here we have what we call our conventional agriculture. You know, this is how we have to dress if we use petrochemically based artificial fertilizer. We have to really question, is that something we should eat? If you have to dress like this to spray this food? do we want to eat this? And when I was flying here on Wednesday from Manila, I took this picture out of the airplane window, and I was just looking at this incredibly beautiful, emerald green nature. So amazing, so beautiful to see, such big surfaces, extensions, free, green. So you have a treasure here with water and these emerald green hills. Agrochemical versus regenerative agriculture. We have to remember that 33% of the CO2 released today remains in the atmosphere for 100 years, and almost 20% remains in the atmosphere for 1,000 years. So, our cars, our agrochemical production, the soil emissions, and so much else. It's going to stay here for at least 100 years. Which means that even if we stopped today all emissions, we will still experience climate breakdown for many years to come. And that's why we're talking today not of sustainability, we're talking about resilience. Because these changes are coming. And we have to be prepared. So we have to increase food security, water security, energy security. On the local scale, decomposing rice hulls are serious emitters of methane. When you just put the rice hulls on the field and they decompose, that's 27 times more polluting than CO2, the methane. So doing something like making biochar out of rice hulls would be a very effective way of reducing climate breakdown. It's difficult to think of a problem with water here. You seem to be very rich in water resources, but globally 97% of the water on our planet is salt water, and only 2.5% is fresh water. And of that total, 1% is available fresh water. And 50 to 70% of available fresh water goes to agriculture. So by adding biochar to our soils, we reduce the need for water and make more water available for drinking. So again, it improves nutrient retention, requires less or no fertilizer, and improves resilience to extreme weather. Conclusion, regenerative biochar-based agriculture reduces need for slash and burn, which is, so we're increasing fertility on existing land. There's studies that in order for a family to live in a slash and burn agriculture, they require 50 hectares, each family, because that's the time it takes for the forest to regenerate. So they have to move all the time, and it takes many, many years for that soil to regenerate. By using biochar, by enriching the soil naturally with compost and biochar, microorganisms, you reduce that. A family can live well on 1 hectare. Big difference. And this is the Valley of Soyer, and it's like a cauldron. So it's like a pot. And so in the fall, when people start to burn their biomass, all the smoke gets stuck in the village, in the town. And in the hills, it looks like this. These aren't clouds. This is smoke from burning olive cuttings and different cuttings from agriculture. As a result, children in this valley have the highest incidence of respiratory diseases, asthma and so on. So when we went visiting some farms on Thursday, I took these beautiful pictures of a sunset and I saw a similar thing on the ground here. This is a little dark, but there's this smoke layer at the bottom. And since biochar burning using pyrolysis at 400 to 800 degrees creates a very effective burn, we reduce or eliminate smoke, provided the biomass is dry. So by making biochar through pyrolysis, we won't have this smoke pollution. Because pollution is not, it's not the gases, it's the smoke, and smoke is particles. You know, and particles, when we have particles that are smaller than 5 microns, 5 millionths of a millimeter, no, thousandths of a millimeter. Anything smaller than 5 microns goes into the respiratory system. If it's more than 5 microns, we cough it up and it comes out. But smoke less than 5 microns goes into our respiratory system, and that's like smoking or worse. So another reason to introduce a more efficient burn of biomass to make biochar and eliminate smoke. And here's the most simple and effective way of making biochar, just taking a barrel, recycled oil barrel, 200 liters. Actually, you need 2, one for the bottom and one for the top, and then you put a smokestack on it, and you see that the flame burns clean. This is, by the way, the same farm where we did our field trial. This is the agricultural cooperative of the valley. And here's the farm where we visited, an organic citrus farm in Sawyer. And the photo on the right is Mayor Richard studying the composting construction of that organic citrus farm. And I'm just going to go through these rather quickly. This is a project that we did in 2014, a field trial that I did with my daughter, who's studying natural resource management at a university in Germany. And she's writing her thesis on biochar. She's now doing her master's. She was at the time doing her bachelor's. But we were given a corner of the farm to do this field trial with biochar. So of course at the beginning we were just cleaning it up, separating the biomass and chipping it, grinding it some of it, and preparing the TLUDs, top-loaded updraft device, the most simple way of making biochar with barrels. And here, you know, it's burning full blast, but there's no smoke coming out of it. You can see the flame inside the barrel, but it's absolutely clean. And what still surprises me every time I do this is to see how even the smallest fibers get carbonized. They don't burn, they don't turn to ash. And we saw the same thing when we did the test of the Kontiki on Saturday here. So this way of burning through pyrolysis really makes a high quality carbon. And here again, the field study we did, we wanted to demonstrate the potential of biochar as a sustainable alternative to seedling substrates, and that the biochar leads to a higher yield of orchard crops in combination with common organic fertilizers. So we prepared the soil. We took horse manure on the lower left, and then we mixed basically equal parts of compost, horse manure, and biochar. But we didn't add any microorganisms. That's all we did. And we did a design of randomized plots. So we did 8 plots, and 4 of them had biochar and 4 of them didn't. But it was a randomized A, B, C, and D, and we, positioned these so that the differences in the soil shouldn't make any difference, so we would get a statistically correct result of whatever changes there were in the harvest. And we made the biochar and we spread it out on those 4 plots. And we planted the seedlings And as sometimes happens when you're doing tests, of course disaster struck when we did this. We had an attack by bugs that basically ate up all the seedlings, so we didn't have anything to plant. So we covered the area with straw, mulch, and put a netting over it so that it wouldn't blow away, and we just left it. And this was interesting because we thought, well, this is a disaster. We lost a whole season, right? But it was actually very good because it gave the land about 4 months to get those microorganisms started, to make them start to grow. And afterwards, we did the first harvest of weeds. We harvested the weeds. And we noticed already on the weeds that the lots where the weeds had grown in the biochar, the nitrogen nodules were bigger. So they were already working better in the soil. It was very interesting. But then spring came and we started again, and we cultivated, rotocultivated the soil, made the plots a little bit better, and planted lima beans, crucifera, leguminosa, cabbages, broccolis, things like that. And already we began to see a difference. So on the top left photo you can see the difference between the biochar plot and the one behind where there was no biochar. And on the next picture over to the right you can see a little bit more. And then of course everything just eventually catches up. And we couldn't really see the difference visually. So we harvested and we started weighing the results. So we counted how many beans in each plot, we weighed the biomass, and we observed the root structure with the nitrogen modules, which was very interesting. And the results on these 8 plots varied between 23 and 62% increase in productivity by count and weight of the biomass, which was we thought it was really quite interesting. We went on to try another season and we planted tomatoes. And this is very important also because when we did the tomatoes, we did 2 different types of tomatoes. And on the one species of tomato, we had a 45% increase in productivity. On the other, we had a 27% decrease in productivity, which I don't know what it depended on. Maybe it was because I was traveling at the time, my daughter was back at the university, and I wasn't very good at going down to water the plants. So, statistical error on my part. But it just goes to show, it doesn't always work with everything. So we still have to learn, we have to try different things out. So that was that, and it was a lot of fun, of course, and we had a lot of help, not least the owners of the farm that made it available to us. So how does this work? You know, when I got involved in the environment, I started by planting trees on a coffee farm in Brazil, because I thought, well, you know, if we're going to do something for the environment, we need to plant trees. And so I went and started a project. I was living in Sweden at the time, still had a lot of contacts with friends. Friends in Brazil. And so I planted trees. And I came back from Brazil, this was 2009, and a very good friend, activist, environmental activist, he said, well, you know, planting trees is great, but what you should be doing is biochar. And I said, what do you mean? You want me to burn trees? You think that's better for the environment? I'm planting trees. I don't want to burn trees. He says, no, biochar is different. And it took me a long time to get my head around this idea that I would be helping the environment by burning biomass, because it doesn't really make sense. Say, you know, let's plant trees. And it's true, of course we need to plant trees. And that's why it's so important that we don't plant trees to burn them. We plant trees to trim them, make cuttings, and then we put those cuttings back into the soil. And the difference between different energies here is we have a carbon positive fossil energy. We take it basically from the ground, the fossil fuels. We make energy and we put it all into the atmosphere. That's what we've been doing for the past 200 years. That's why we have our problem. Then you have a carbon neutral renewable energies, water, wind, sun. That's, just energy. It's not taking anything out of the ground and it's not putting anything into the air. It's clean. With a slight comment, because we have to remember that wind power stations, solar panels, hydro plants also require products, metal, industry, manufacturing. So there is a carbon footprint, and they have a lifespan as well, and they need maintenance. So we have to be careful with this idea of renewables, because renewables also have a carbon footprint. It's getting lower and lower, but it's still there. Then you have carbon neutral bioenergy. So you basically grow trees to create energy, right? Biodigesters, biofuels, but you're taking it down from using the CO2 from the atmosphere, growing biomass, and then emitting that same biomass back. So it's carbon neutral. The difference and the great, the revolutionary difference of biochar is you're doing a carbon negative bioenergy. So you're taking that CO2 from the atmosphere to grow biomass, and you burn it, so you do emit some CO2, but you're also converting nitrous oxide and methane, so you're reducing the effects of those two greenhouse gases, and most importantly, you're putting a lot of the carbon back into the soil. That's where the difference comes. So it's a carbon capture and storage technology. Here's another illustration of how that carbon cycle works and the difference to biochar. So we capture the biomass produced by photosynthesis, pyrolyze it, and put it into the ground, thereby reducing the CO2 in the atmosphere and gaining energy in the process. Here is another design of a retort. We saw the barrel before. This is a way of doing it which is a little more effective, a little better quality biochar. You see that there's a barrel inside the barrel. And these are different ways of making biochar. Here's a rocket stove mass heater which can also be adapted to produce biochar and a lot of energy using very low amounts of fuel or biomass in this case. They can be made very beautifully to heat homes and public spaces very effectively. And here are some photographs of more biochar producing kilns, ovens. The one on the top left can also produce electricity. The one on the top right is also a retort, so you heat the chamber around the center, and so no fire touches the biomass in the center chamber, but it's heated by putting fuel around it. And once the fuel around it begins to heat that inner chamber, the inner chamber biomass starts releasing the gases. So the gases get released, and when when there's no more gas to be burned, then the biochar is finished and it just stops burning, which also creates a very high quality biochar. And on the bottom there's a mobile unit, also known as the Adams retort. That's from the US, New England. Very good system. You can make up to a ton of biochar per day with that mobile unit. And it's serial, so you can actually hook up 2 or 3 in line, and you can be making 3 tons of biochar per day. Now, 1 ton of biochar is the equivalent of exactly 3.67 CO2. So in round figures, we can say that when we have 1 ton of biomass, it will reduce to about 25% in volume and weight into biochar, but 25% would be 250 kilos of biochar times 3.67 or 4 makes it into 1 ton of CO2 sequestration. So you're sequestering, by every ton of biomass, roughly you're sequestering 1 ton of CO2. Here are some larger systems which also produce electricity. The one on the top left is in Australia. The one on the bottom is a system in Denmark, which works as a demo but does not work in production. So some of these systems still require testing and development, but there are new systems coming online all the time. But you have to be careful. If you want to make an investment in this, the prices begin at 100,000 euros up to 1 million euros for a system that can provide electricity. But one really has to test this and see how it works. There's a lot of companies investing large amounts of money and don't really have the technology down yet. British Petroleum, Exxon, and Shell are the companies behind this initiative in the United States called Cool Planet. They grow biomass to make biochar and liquid fuel out of it. And they say basically, here's the new fuel of the future, and we don't have to reduce our habits or drive more economical cars, because basically we can produce this fuel through biomass and producing biochar in the process. Here's a diagram that just says a little bit about what would be going on in an ideal community situation where you take maximum advantage of organic residue waste and make biochar out of it and compost. So, from the houses, you're picking up your waste, or dry organic waste or wet compostable waste. You bring this to biochar production, the dry stuff, produce electricity, district heating. The wet compost goes into biogas production in a biodigester. The char of these things is then taken to the agriculture to grow things, and those vegetables and fruits go to the supermarkets and back to the homes, and you have a full circle of maximum utilization of the biomass and the compostable materials, retaining nutrients, enriching the soil, and sequestering carbon at the same time. So we'll just go through a little bit of a summary now. Circle Carbon. This is my business that I started with a co-founder, and there's now 4 of us working with it in Spain. We leased a property on June 1st, and we're restoring that and preparing it as a demo center. I've been working with biochar on Mallorca for the past 5 years, internationally for the past 9 years from when we started in Brazil. And with this business, we hope to show, as Mayor Richard was so kind to tell, that we have to really look not only at the bottom line, we have to look at the triple bottom line. We have to look at not only the profit in money, but the profit in society and the profit to the environment. So we have to find new business models to do business unusual, because business as usual doesn't work. What we've been doing so far in science, in society, in economy, has brought us to where we are now. So we have to question those things and see what can we do. And it's an exciting process, of course.